Hello and welcome to my ethics presentation for client and civic communications. Today we'll be reviewing a December 2020 video by Tucker Carlson on Fox News discussing how Tucker Carlson abuses civic engagement, manipulates rhetoric, and abuses technical communication in order to further his political agenda.
First reports of a mysterious new virus spreading through central China reached the West last winter. This show first reported on COVID in January, back before it had a name. That was nearly a year ago. For the past 11 months, the world has been waiting with increasing desperation for a cure, for a vaccine. More than 1.5 million people have died. Now the vaccine has finally arrived, and a new vaccine just today approved. We should be rejoicing in this, and yet many Americans are reluctant to take the vaccine. Why? Well, it's not all superstition. There are rational reasons to be skeptical, to ask questions. There's never in history been a successful vaccine for any variety of the coronavirus. The last one that scientists developed for SARS proved too dangerous to bring to market. Nor has any vaccine ever been developed as quickly as this one. The only attempt that came close was the mumps vaccine back in 1967, and that took 4 years. This took months. The authorities assure us that this new vaccine is completely safe, and of course we want to believe that badly. On the other hand, it's not crazy to wonder. You may have seen video of that nurse in Chattanooga yesterday passing out cold after getting her shot. You may have seen the press conference on Tuesday in San Antonio, where a healthcare worker received a fake vaccination on camera. He got the needle in the arm, but he didn't actually get a dose. The hospital conceded that's what happened, but never explained it.
So to address the three things that he just said, Sarah Cohen's article, The Fastest Vaccine in History, How Scientists Created Safe, Effective COVID-19 Vaccines in Record Time, quotes Eric Darr, MD, Chief of HIV Medicine at Harvard UCLA Medical Center, when saying efforts to develop vaccines for HIV or MERS or SARS or Ebola, end quote, are the reason that the COVID vaccine was so easily and quickly put out. It's because of the extreme advancements in technology and vaccine making within the past decade that we've made. The Chattanooga nurse who passed out, her name is Tiffany Dover, and she has a condition where fainting sometimes occurs when she feels pain. San Antonio fake vaccine story is neither true nor proven to be false. Because of all of the complaints of people who thought it was false, they redid the recording of the nurse in question receiving the first vaccine over again, which is safe to do.
So it's fair to have questions. You were not a conspiracy nut for wanting answers. On the other hand, rushed development and a clumsy rollout do not fully explain many people's reluctance to take this drug. The worry goes deeper than that. The concern isn't simply the vaccine, it's the people in charge of the vaccine and their basic moral rottenness. Americans understand that many of our leaders really don't care about them. They don't care about human beings in general. They are ideologues. They're religious fanatics who worship their secular gods, money, power, wokeness. Whether their policies help or hurt individuals doesn't seem of great interest to them. These are the people who removed police from poor neighborhoods because it made them feel less guilty about their own pampered lives and their own ill-gotten wealth. As a result of that decision, many Americans died, including small children, but they kept doing it.
So it's completely unfounded, obviously. What he's talking about is the removal of police from poor person of color neighborhoods, and TheHill is quoted to say, "The modern American police system rewards officers for the wrong things, including number of arrests made and the amount of contraband seized. Their training also encourages viewing residents as potential threats rather than as members of the community, and this trend tends to foster an adversarial relationship with locals." U.S. News reported to say more than 1,000 unarmed people died as a result of police harm between 2013 and 2019. About a third of them are black. About 17% of the black people who died as a result of police harm were unarmed. So again, his claim is completely unfounded, and it has been proven that over-policing in neighborhoods where people of color live is extremely detrimental, as they are killed for no reason while they are unarmed.
They never apologized. Human suffering seemed irrelevant to them. It was the theory that mattered. Unfortunately, some of these very same people, the worst in our already unimpressive professional class, are now in charge of the coronavirus vaccine, and that should make you nervous. Tonight, officials of the CDC are debating how to distribute the vaccine, who gets it first, and on the basis of what criteria.
So he says here who gets it first. It was already known at this point that the first people to get the vaccine would be the frontline medical workers. What they're actually what they're actually deciding and discussing is who gets the vaccine second, behind the frontline medical workers.
That decision will to some extent determine who lives and who dies. It's a big decision, and it shouldn't be complicated. According to the CDC's own models, the way to save the most Americans is to give the vaccine to frontline healthcare workers first, and then to the elderly, meaning people over the age of 65.
So, yes, they're going to give it to the frontline medical workers first. He says over the age of 65 here. However, what it came down to was they gave the first doses to medical frontline workers, and the second set of doses went to both frontline workers and people over the age of 75. He specifically says 65 to manipulate his audience here.
Older people are by far the most vulnerable, as we now know well. Every other age group has a survival rate of over 99.9%. That's why in Britain, authorities are getting the vaccine to the elderly as quickly as they can.
This isn't inaccurate, but also the UK has less people, less nurses, obviously. The first vaccine in the UK went to a 90-year-old woman named Margaret Keenan. 90 years old, well above the age of 75.
But in this country, a panel of ideologues at the CDC has decided that the elderly should not be at the front of the line. The center's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices has made a different determination.
Remember, elderly as in under 75.
And the reasoning is simple. Old people in this country are too white to save. Now that sounds shocking because it is shocking, but they put it in writing. The CDC's Vaccine Advisory Committee unanimously approved recommendations last month from a doctor called Kathleen Dooling. According to Dooling's presentation, it is true that more lives would be saved if the elderly received priority access to the vaccine. But here's the problem. Quote, racial and ethnic minority groups are underrepresented among adults aged 65 and older.
So to address this comment here, it's because people of color die sooner than white people because of systemic racism, violence, also racism within the medical community. That's why it went to people over 75 and not people 65 and older up to the 74 mark, is because people 75 and over are truly at risk, and people under that have the ability and the medical resources in order to take care of themselves if they're really sick. No, what he's going to say, what he's not going to say here, or that Fox News isn't going to say here, is that those people who are worried about their lives, those under the age of 75 who aren't frontline workers, who aren't absolutely necessary for society's function, should stay inside, wear masks, practice social distancing, and avoid any unnecessary contact with anybody who might endanger them if they're so very worried about it.
Therefore, the elderly should not be a top priority. According to the CDC's panel, another group, those officially classified as, quote, non-healthcare essential workers, should get the vaccine first. Well, why is that? Quote, racial and ethnic minority groups are disproportionately represented in many essential industries. And
so what he's saying here is that most frontline workers are people of color, which is accurate, and they, as essential workers, should receive the vaccine because they don't have the option to stay home, unlike retired people over the age of 65 who are receiving Social Security income or disability or retirement money, who have the option to stay home. Poor persons of color who don't have the option to stay home without risking losing their job, losing their mortgage, or becoming homeless should receive the vaccine first, as they don't have the option, unlike retired people.
Quote. In other words, it's entirely racial. They're making the decision based on race. Kathleen Dooling's presentation concluded that doling out life-saving medicine on the basis of skin color would, quote, mitigate health inequities. Of course, it would kill people, and she effectively concedes that. But the people it would kill come from a disfavored race, so it's not a big deal. It's been a very long time since anyone close to what we would consider the mainstream has endorsed eugenics. And that's exactly what that is.
That's wrong. Eugenics isn't about race. Eugenics is about things such as genetic disability. For example, I have a genetic disability, but race is not eugenics. No, you're just being racist at that point.
Eugenics. But suddenly it's everywhere. Earlier this month, the New York Times, supposedly our greatest newspaper, interviewed a leading expert on medical ethics and vaccination at the University of Pennsylvania. He's a man called Harold Schmidt. Here's how Harold Schmidt advised the CDC, quote, older populations are whiter. Society is structured in a way that enables them to live longer. Instead of giving additional health benefits to those who already have more of them, we can start to level the playing field a bit.
So, obviously, that's just a reiteration of what I've said previously. However, what isn't being addressed here is the systemic racism that brings about these issues. So, and to double back, looking to Kurt Wilson's Towards a Discursive Theory of Racial Identity, The Souls of Black Folk as a Response to 19th Century Biological Determinism, printed by the Western Journal of Communications, Wilson says, quote, the social construct of race in which Haney Lopez, 1984, considers how biological determinism has influenced race in the United States, ellipses, Haney Lopez advises that race must be viewed as a social construct, that is, human interaction rather than natural differentiation must be seen as the source and continued basis for racial categorization. So what Tucker Carlson is doing here is creating those racial divides and encouraging racism while labeling it as eugenics, which is completely false.
Level the playing field. That means intentionally causing people's deaths because they're the wrong color.
And again, as that graphic pops up on screen, it says race-based vaccine deployment, which is, again, inaccurate because it's not race-based. It's a matter of where you work. If you're a poor white person, you're just as likely to get the vaccine as a poor person of color if you are a frontline necessary worker.
When was the last time you heard someone say something like that out loud in this country? Probably not since around 1945. That's when we all agreed that letting certain people die because of their race was bad public policy, not to mention evil.
So it's funny that he's mentioning World War II here because as BuzzFeed News and multiple other outlets have sourced, Tucker Carlson's #1 fan base are neo-Nazis. So he's discussing World War II, and the people that are watching him, for the most part, are people who don't believe in the Holocaust or supported the Nazis or are Nazis themselves today. Just find that very ironic.
But suddenly our leaders have forgotten that lesson. It's like the Second World War never happened. In the same New York Times piece that quotes Harold Schmidt, yet another doctor makes a similar point. His name is Mark Lipsitch. He's an epidemiologist at Harvard. Here's why he thinks teachers should not be included in the now favored category of non-healthcare essential workers.
So to just clarify very quickly before he rambles on some more, teachers should have been staying home. Teachers should have been allowed to stay home during this time, just as people who are retired have the opportunity to stay home. We can all transfer to online school. Frontline essential workers are absolutely essential. Otherwise, we'll starve to death or something like that. We'll run out of toilet paper. A teacher isn't going to be providing toilet paper. You can take a few days off of school or you can switch to online classes. They're not absolutely necessary frontline workers. So he's going to, again, bring up class and race in order to manipulate his point, but he's, again, wrong.
Quote, teachers have middle-class salaries, are very often white, and they have college degrees. In other words, wrong color, not essential. Is the hair on anyone else's arm standing up? What the hell is going on? Talk like that from the people in charge makes the population highly paranoid and fearful about the future, and it should. In California, the governor's order.
So, just to give you a little bit of context of how how unethical he's being, I'm going to read you this quote by Sam Draga in Is This Ethical? A Survey of Opinion on Principles and Practices of Document Design. The quote says, the ability to design information gives the technical communicator, Tucker Carlson in this instance, a new rhetorical power and imposes new ethical obligations on using that power, such as being truthful and not manipulating rhetoric. This new rhetorical power, however, is also a source of peril for technical communication to technical communicators because little research or guidance is available to identify the principles and practices that would lead to ethical document design. So within this situation, Tucker Carlson is repeatedly quoting the New York Times, which is a paid-for newspaper service or online newspaper, and he's speaking to people who definitely aren't renting or buying the New York Times, and I don't even know if he's buying it himself, but he's definitely misquoting it to an audience that he knows isn't going to look into it and fact check him. An absolute misuse of rhetoric and technical communications.
Announced the state will distribute medicine based on how people look.
Experts in safety, as well as experts looking at equity and looking at the distribution from a geriatric perspective, and looking at distributions, again, along the spectrum of making sure Black and brown communities disproportionately are benefited because of the impact they have felt disproportionately because of COVID-19.
So, yes, people of color are more targeted for getting the vaccine because they are dying at higher rates than white people. That's just what the governor of California said just there.
Ethnicities will get the vaccine first because of their ethnicity, says the governor of California. And it doesn't matter if that policy winds up killing more people.
It's ironic because it's actually intended to save people's lives, as people of color are again dying at higher rates than white people.
Or is not based in science, because it's not based in science.
The science that we just stated.
In fact, maybe that's the point. It'll level the playing field. In Oregon, the head of the public health department, Rachel Banks, has made the same commitment. If you want the vaccine, you had better not be white. Quote, "We have a variety of ways to ensure there's equitable distribution, both geographically and particularly focused on communities of color who've seen unfair, disproportionate impact from COVID-19. To get a little more specific, Oregon's health authority has released a statement that promises that, quote, Black, Indigenous, Latino, Latina, Latinx, Pacific Islander, and tribal communities will have, quote, equitable access to vaccination, meaning first dibs.
So he says meaning first dibs right there. What equitable actually means is dealing fairly and equally with all concerned. So if you're dying at a higher rate, then you're going to be a higher priority than someone who isn't dying.
In a world like this, where even vaccines are distributed on the basis of skin color, it's no wonder that many have decided to transition to a new race. Why wouldn't they? It doesn't pay to be in your old race. In Oregon, a group of Slavic Americans has petitioned the state's coalition of communities of color for membership, and it was granted, so they're no longer white. Apparently, neither is Nancy Pelosi.
So, to address the Slavic white people in Oregon, he's talking about refugees that came here between 1990 and 2000. Obviously, he's not going to say refugees because Fox News hates refugees and Tucker Carlson very much hates refugees, but those are refugees, and that's why they were granted that special permission. It's because they're from the former Soviet Union. The PortlandOregon.gov says the Slavic community is defined as those from the former Soviet Union. It is the largest refugee-based community in Oregon, with most arriving in the decade from 1990 to 2001. So these are immigrants. These are refugees. These are people seeking asylum in our country. And they're going to inherently be marginalized within our community because they're not from here.
She was one of the first people in the country to get the vaccine. So Pelosi is now a person.
Yes, a congresswoman is one of the first people to get the vaccine. If our country can't run, then how are we supposed to fight COVID?
Person of color, as well as essential, which at this point are basically the same thing. That is the consensus now all over the country from our leaders.
Just over half of states with publicly available plans for vaccine distribution have at least one mention of incorporating racial equity.
There's a great amount of mistrust.
Vicky Hernandez runs a community center here.
Community center, as in something very similar to Healthy St. Pete. They don't say what it is, so we don't know for sure.
Black and brown communities primarily make up essential workers, and they have been disproportionately affected by COVID, and so for that reason, they should be prioritized.
This is insanity. When you are planning to distribute life-saving medicines on the basis of race, not on the basis of science, but on the basis of race, you are by definition dividing the country more deeply and more permanently, really, than you could under any circumstances. Nothing is worse than that if you want a cohesive country.
So he's pretty much done here, but what he's saying is that this isn't based on science. It is based on science. It's based on saving people's lives, because white people are surviving COVID more than people of color. People of color are both getting COVID more and also dying of COVID. So his whole notion of race being eugenics is wrong, because that's just racism, that's not eugenics. And also, people of color are dying. And as he mentioned earlier, police kill people. So this is reaching out to help a community that has been disproportionately affected for hundreds of years, to try and stop them from dying.
The case they're making, when you're the right color, you're essential. And that makes sense, considering that increasingly your color is your essence. It's the most important thing about you. In this case, you can determine whether you live or die. That's the country they are creating. So is it any wonder that this vaccine rollout makes people nervous?
So again, just to finish it off, he's talking about frontline workers who are absolutely necessary to the function of society, and he's talking to neo-Nazis and people under the age of 75 who can't get the vaccine because they should be home and practicing the necessary precautions in order to stay safe, rather than the frontline workers who don't have that option. So, all right, thank you.